You know the drill. Carved pumpkins, spooky costumes, loads of candy. We all know what Halloween looks like today. But have you ever stopped to wonder where it all really came from? Well, today, we're going to peel back the mask and dig into the surprising and, honestly, often misunderstood history of Halloween. Let's get right into it. So this is the story I'm sure you've heard a million times, right? It's everywhere. The idea is that Halloween is basically just a modern version of this ancient Celtic pagan festival called Samhain, a super mystical time when the wall between our world and the spirit world got all thin and spooky. But what if that whole story is, well, mostly a modern invention? What if the real history has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? Let's follow the clues and see where they lead. Okay, so our first big clue is hiding right in the open. It's the name itself. The word Halloween doesn't actually come from some ancient mystical Celtic language. Nope, its origin is way more straightforward than that. Turns out Halloween is just a squished together way of saying All Hallows Eve. And what's that? Well, it's the evening before the Christian holy day of All Hallows Day, or as most people know it, All Saints Day, which is on November 1st. You know how language works, right? Things get shortened over time. All Hallows Eve just got slurred together into Halloween. And then eventually we drop the apostrophe, and bam, you get Halloween. So the name itself, it's 100% Christian in origin, not pagan. All right, I know what you're thinking. Fine, the name is Christian, but what about the date? This is kind of the heart of the whole pagan origin theory. If it's a Christian holiday, why land it on the exact same day as the Celtic festival of Samhain? That's the smoking gun, right? The church just stole a pagan holiday? Well, the timeline tells a very, very different story. Yeah, this is the big one. And for a long, long time, pretty much everyone just assumed it was a deliberate takeover. But when you actually look at the historical records, the story gets a whole lot more fascinating. Turns out, it wasn't a takeover at all. Okay, check this out, because this timeline just blows that whole pagan takeover theory right out of the water. Look, the Feast of All Saints was originally in the spring. In Rome, it was May 13th, and here's the kicker. In Ireland, the homeland of the Celts, they were celebrating it on April 20th. The move to November 1st didn't even start there. It started in England and areas of France and Germany, and it wasn't made official until way later, in 835. So here's the bottom line. The Irish church, the Celtic church, wasn't even celebrating this holiday in the fall when the November 1st date was being set somewhere else. The fact that this Christian holy day ended up on the same date as the old Celtic festival of Samhain was, for all intents and purposes, just a massive coincidence. Okay, so the date's a coincidence. But come on, the costumes, trick-or-treating, that's gotta be pagan, right? Well, once again, the real history might just surprise you. Let's dig in to where some of Halloween's most famous traditions actually come from. So the myth you always hear is that people wore costumes to fool evil spirits that were wandering around. But the real, direct ancestor of trick-or-treating, it's a medieval Christian tradition called souling. On All Hallows Eve, poor folks would go door to door and get little pastries called soul cakes, and in return, they'd promise to pray for the souls of that family's dead relatives to help them get out of purgatory, which was kind of like a spiritual waiting room, and into heaven. Going door to door for treats? That sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? All right, but what about the big guy, the icon of Halloween itself, that spooky, glowing face of the jack-o'-lantern? Surely that's got to be some ancient pagan thing, right? Nope, not at all. It actually comes from a classic Irish folktale. Well, the legend goes there was this guy, Stingy Jack, who was such a trickster he even managed to trap the devil himself. He made a deal. He'd let the devil go if the devil promised to never take his soul. Well, Jack eventually dies, but he was too sinful for heaven. And the devil, being true to his word, wouldn't let him into hell either. So poor Jack was just cast out to wander in the dark forever. The devil, probably laughing, just tosses Jack a single burning coal from hell to light his way. So Jack takes his favorite food, a turnip, hollows it out, and plops the coal inside. And he became known as Jack of the Lantern, or Jack-o'-lantern. And people in Ireland started carving their own scary faces into turnips to scare him and other spirits away. So where do pumpkins come into all this? Well, when Irish immigrants came to America in the 1800s, they brought their traditions with them. And they figured out pretty fast that the pumpkins that grew in America were way bigger and a whole lot easier to carve than a tough old turnip. So the tradition adapted and the pumpkin became the new symbol of Halloween. So let's recap. We've got a Christian holiday, an Irish folktale, and a bunch of American pumpkins. How on earth did all that stuff get mashed together to become the massive holiday we know and love today? Because really, the Halloween we celebrate, it's pretty much an American invention. It took all these different folk traditions from immigrants, especially the Irish, and threw them into the great American melting pot. And over time, it became less about religion or folklore and more about community parties, fun, and eventually, a huge business. And when I say huge business, I mean it. Get this. Back in 2018, the average person celebrating Halloween in the US spent over $185. That's a lot of candy and costumes. The holiday has totally transformed from a few simple folk customs into a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, this really lays it all out, doesn't it? The humble turnip lantern becomes the big, grinning pumpkin. Praying for souls becomes trick or treat, give me some candy. And handmade folk customs get replaced by mass-produced superhero costumes. A holiday once rooted in mysticism and the afterlife became all about modern materialism. So what's the big takeaway here? The story we all tell about Halloween's ancient pagan roots is, ironically, a modern invention itself. It shows that history is way messier, and honestly, a lot more interesting than the neat little stories we like to tell ourselves. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What other traditions that we think are ancient are actually just really good stories we've all agreed to believe in?